Good morning and welcome to The Skinny for Friday, November 7th. I'm Mitch Perry, the senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix, joined today by, as always, with my radio partner, creative loafing editor-in-chief Ray Roa. And Ray, great to be back in Tampa Bay today. I was in Atlanta all week, actually, and other parts of northern Georgia for the first time in my life. Beautiful. You can really see fall happening up there with the trees, the foliage, and also Paul McCartney, who I went and saw Monday night, 2 hour and 40-minute incredible performance.
Did he take a sip of water? I feel like the last time I saw him, he didn't even drink water. Did you notice?
That's a great point. Did he or not? You know, I was kind of in the rafters, so I don't know if I saw him do that. But there was no intermission, though. You know, It was straight through.
How did he play?
What's that?
2.5?
2 hours and 40 minutes.
Jeez.
Yeah, and I would say only like a handful of songs were past, let's face it, past 1980. Okay, I mean, we're talking Wings material.
How old is he?
And he's 83 years old now.
How's his voice?
Well, you know, some people criticize the voice, say it's not as strong. It sounded pretty good up at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta.
He's not singing opera, for God's sake.
So anyway, that's the voice of Barry Edwards. Who, if you were listening to Down and Dirty, Barry doing double duty.
Yeah,
actually.
Barry lives here now.
Yeah, so he's because we're here talking politics, of course.
Reasonable voice.
The raging centrist, as he calls himself. Although I think some of our listeners might think it's more on the right as we go on this conversation.
The raging part is correct.
But we're going to get into it about the election. You know, I'm so glad that Down and Dirty. If you haven't been tuning in. Of course, we're going to talk all about the elections, the big off-year elections in the country, but also in Florida. By the way, not a lot talked about here in Florida because obviously not in the Tampa Bay area. But so anyway, Barry Edwards, longtime political consultant for both Democrats and Republicans for over 40 years. He is now on the show with us today. Barry, good morning.
Good morning. And that means I'm over 39, I guess.
Indeed. Yes, I don't even know what that means. But hey, I want to talk first before we get into elections. Let's talk big political news in Florida. That is Orange County Mayor Jerry Demings officially entered the race for the Democratic nomination for governor this week against now, of course, David Jolly. Demings, I think a lot of our listeners probably aren't too familiar with him. He's just finishing up his second and final term as mayor of one of Florida's last big Democratic bastions, Orlando, Orange County. It really still is. And he came to my attention just the last few months, clashing with Governor DeSantis and Blaise Ingoglia on these things like Doge and also on ICE and all of that. And by the way, we have reached out to the Demings campaign, and we really think he'll be on next week. So we really look forward to having him on. And like many of our listeners, okay, Jerry Demings, we know you were a police chief before, you were a county mayor, but what's your stances? Obviously, you're a Democrat, so but there's a lot to learn about him, and we hopefully will have him here. But going to you, Barry Edwards, how does this shake up the race, the Democratic race for primary? David Jolly has been basically by himself for several months this year. We know that he hasn't raised a lot of money, and that's been a criticism. But I've seen him 3 or 4 times in front of big crowds, including in places like, Polk County. I know it's been in Lee County. Anyway, your thoughts about...
So Florida's 23 million people. And going to all these little coffee clutches is nice. But Democrats that haven't been able to raise, or Republicans, $70 million, $80 million, $90 million statewide at the top of the ticket, don't win. Okay, so he has $600,000. He's raised $2 million, has like $600,000 on hand. He is not a viable candidate. And I love David Jolly, but he's not viable. If you can't raise the money, but it shows you there's no interest outside of Florida in the race. And it shows you there's really no interest in Florida in the race. But 2...
Nationally, you mean?
Nationally.
Yeah.
So, but 2 is Jerry Demings is mayor of a huge county. He's a former sheriff, so he's got law creds. His wife. So David is doing the first time. He's setting up an organization. Florida is mammoth, having lived and worked on statewide campaigns for 40 years. I mean, it is hard work. I mean, it is not an old man's game. His wife just ran for the U.S. Senate, raised more money, $30-40 million total spending.
Than Marco Rubio. And she lost by 16 points to Marco Rubio.
17.5, I think, but whatever.
No, let's stay with 16.
Okay, well, we're looking at my data.
Yeah.
Every 25 years, I have a data recall error. But she already has an organization in every county. So Jerry picks up the phone and says, Val, who do I call?
Well, also,
and
get
boom,
this.
Boom, boom.
Kimberly Leonard.
You 2 years
Well,
worth of
also,
work.
Barry, on the money issue, Kimberly Leonard from Political Florida reported this morning, John Morgan, the prominent billionaire from Orlando who's close to the Demings, he may financially contribute to Jerry Demings' campaign. And she writes that if he ultimately writes a big check for Demings, that could be a game changer.
Oh, I think that the fundraising, David was not doing well in fundraising before Demings is in.
Yeah.
So you've got a guy that now has a built-in organization, not only to tap in any money outside of Florida that might be interested through Val, but also has as a campaign field operation that they can set up with Val. And they know the mistakes that they just made because they're self-reflective people. I mean, they don't just say, "Oh, we lost by 17," or 16 or whatever. But as mayor of Orange County, he can raise more than David just because of the transactional nature of being mayor of Orange County. So he is the front runner, and I'm going to predict on this show, Jerry Demings will be the Democratic nominee. You're going to have in Florida, the third largest state in the country, will have a black nominee, an African American, because I got queued out by some members of Black Caucus because we have Caribbean blacks and African blacks. We'll have an African American nominee for Democrat and an African-American nominee for the Republican for the first time in U.S. history. Both the viable candidates. And unfortunately for Demings is that Byron will be the next governor.
Let me ask you a question. 2019 feels like a really long time ago, but thinking about Gillum, I think he raised like just short of $40 million.
That was
really
his campaign
close.
account.
Right.
His PAC raised tens of millions.
Okay.
So he actually outraised and outspent DeSantis. Remember, DeSantis wasn't viable until Susie Wiles took over on October 1st.
And it was an incredibly close election. It went into a recount. And speaking of Byron Donalds, who was the Republican congressman from Fort Myers, who was by far the leading candidate right now in the Republican race, we should say that I know we've heard this before, and I've said this on television a couple times in the last couple of months, but I do believe, and Barry, what's your thoughts here, that Jay Collins, the former state senator here from the Hillsborough County area, now our lieutenant governor, is finally going to get into the race next week.
We're here on Veterans Day, and I went to the Reagan Day, I think.
Last Saturday, in Hillsborough County.
He spoke, and so you had Laura Lee spoke, who's the congresswoman from here, and she did a great speech, and he gave it was an all right speech.
Collins.
But then the featured act at the end of the show was they spoke from the podium. Then they changed the stage, and they had two like sofa chairs like you'd have in your living room, something like off a firing line. And Byron got triple the time with Benny Johnson, who's a
by the way, they did that at Charlie Kirk's what's his name? Sorry,
Turning Point.
Turning Point. Thank you, USA at July when that was held in Tampa.
Right.
Same thing. Benny Johnson, who I guess lives in Tampa, by the way.
He does.
Yeah.
He's had 4 kids. He told us.
Interviewed Byron Donalds. So it's interesting. Byron Donalds doesn't like to maybe if he has a choice, doesn't give the speeches, but does a sit down interview.
Well, because you can do softball questions.
Right.
You can say, "Oh, now are you the best Democrat or Republican ever that did this?" In D.C., Byron. Yes, I am, actually. So it provides an opportunity where he can be self-congratulatory without being self-congratulatory.
Right.
But I can tell you, when they had the people stand, 55, and I calculated 55% of the audience stood up and was all for Byron today.
And and again, the big thing there is he's been endorsed by Donald Trump. That really is probably the big thing in this race.
It's the most, and Jay Collins had maybe 5%, 10%. So it was totally. Byron was the king of the hill.
Right.
People wanting to line up to get pictures with. That's also who do you want to get a picture with, the lieutenant governor or the next governor? And they were all over Byron. He was a good speaker. He has the stick down. I think that we saw from the polling for CFO before the governor appointed Blaise Ingoglia that most of the polls were pretty consistent.
Joe Gruters.
That's if you said, would you vote for Joe Gruters endorsed by
Donald Trump
or Blaise Ingoglia endorsed by Ron DeSantis, it was 60-10.
This is a Trump state.
In an open primary, Donald Trump is the king.
Yeah. Again, if you're just tuning in right now, it's 11:15. You're listening to The Skinny here in WMNF. That's Barry Edwards, political consultant, along with Ray Roa. And soon we're going to have another guest with us to talk about politics nationally and here in Florida. Same with Florida, though. Another election, Lakeland. Sarah Roberts McCarley is going to be the new mayor of Lakeland. She narrowly avoided a runoff election on Tuesday. She's a Lakeland native, I believe the first female mayor of Lakeland, actually. And by the way, she is not the woman who worked at Hooters. Okay, there was another candidate who ran from Hooters. That candidate finished in 4th place. But this is really interesting, Barry Edwards. I don't know if you saw this, and I was just telling this to Ray before the show began because this came to my attention and. Lakeland voters, when people talk about term limits or vote on term limits, they usually vote for them, right? They want to restrain politicians. Well,
3-1 in Florida.
Well, in Lakeland, get this though. On Tuesday, the term limits, which are now, I believe, for city commissioners, 12 years, 3 terms, 3 4-year terms. Was increased to 20 years. Yes, 57.8% of voters in Lakeland have supported increased term limits. So, by the way,
Is that a typo?
and I'm going to give the phone number out right now, 813-239-9663 for our listeners in the Bay Area to call in. And I would love to hear from somebody from Lakeland who voted one way or the other on this, because this got like no attention.
That is an anomaly.
Yeah, it really is. And apparently on social media, there was a lot of criticism, people saying like, oh, I didn't even know this was on the ballot, which is like your fault, voter, okay? If you don't, I mean, come on. But also that, it was constructed, the language of the amendment maybe wasn't constructed the way that they understood. And I don't know, I haven't actually seen the language there. But it is interesting, and I would love to hear from somebody who voted on that ballot measure. It's Charter Amendment 2 in Lakeland.
It's a 19% turnout in Lakeland, 62,000 voters.
Yeah, which is, that's more we have the Tampa special election. Another election I want to talk about in Miami before we talk nationally is in Miami. There was a big mayoral election in Miami on Tuesday. There were 12 people running in that race, almost as big as the Tampa special city council election. Republican Francis Suarez, who you might recall a couple years ago ran for president for all of like 2 months. It was kind of a weird thing there. But anyway, he is term limited out. So 12 people ran, and the top vote getter was Eileen Higgins, a Miami-Dade County commissioner, described by Matthew Isbell, who was, of course, the great data analyst who wrote a great piece this morning. As a left-of-center Democrat, she took 36% of the vote. That wasn't enough to get out of the runoff, but she's going to run against Emilio Gonzalez, who has been endorsed by Ron DeSantis and Rick Scott. So that's going to be a very interesting race. That election is on December 9th. And by the way, according to Matthew, there hasn't been a Democrat chosen to serve as Miami mayor in 2 decades. And she received, 53% overall voted for the big Democratic candidates. Ken Russell also got a lot of votes in third place. Kamala Harris got 49% of the vote in the city last year. So, just judging it by one day, Miami seemed to be a little more in the Democrats on Tuesday. And of course, let's talk about the big races. Of course, Ray, we want to talk about New York City in a moment and the governor's races, but also this. I'm sorry, Barry. Yeah.
So, and also in Florida, I think that was very interesting, which hasn't been reported yet.
Yeah.
Did you see that USF or the Board of Governors of Florida just elected Alan Levine, who's been a political powerhouse, as chair, and Tim Serio, both of which I went to college with.
Oh, he's the insurance person.
He's also the CEO of Citizens.
Citizens, right.
They declined to put the confirmation of the new president of USF selected by the Board of Trustees. So my question is, and I don't know, I haven't talked to them yet, is this another Ono situation? Is this guy, did he say that he liked DEI someplace like Ono did 10 years ago?
Right.
But why did he get delayed? And then they said they had too many things on their agenda. If they want to rubber stamp somebody, they just rubber stamp them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So why is the problem?
And this is the Board of Trustees at USF.
They selected the new president, who's the president.
Mo?
I think he's president of UNF now.
No, he's the USF just named the new guy.
Right, but I think he's president of one of the other state universities.
No, he used to be in North Florida. Now he's at USF.
Moez Liam.
Yeah, okay. Mo's the new guy.
So,
who everybody likes, apparently.
The Board of Governors. Well, everybody liked Ono,
they all
too.
like him.
And what I find funny is that, well, I won't say which one of my friends, on the Board of Trustees at UF, and he's also on the Board of Governors, he said that he loved Ono, and then 2 weeks later, when they had the next one, he trashed him.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, it's just
not a profile in courage up there when it comes to.
So what is going on? I think that's a good story. Like, why?
By the way, Jesse Schechner does have the Alan Levine, Tim Sierra story just posted right now.
Oh,
on politics, Florida politics.
Florida politics,
Yep.
Not either of us. Okay, let's talk about. Oh, and I did want, and this was mentioned on the John Dingfelder show. I thought it was very significant in Georgia, where I was at on Tuesday, and they had a big mayoral election in Atlanta and city council race and election on Tuesday. And it was very interesting. I still don't know what the turnout is. I've got to believe it's going to be higher than, you mentioned 19% in Lakeland, because it seemed like, and I was in downtown Atlanta, and you could see all these signs and people at these churches where their precincts, people were voting. It just seemed like there was more engagement there. But this big story in the Southeast and in Georgia was about the Public Service Commission, which, by the way, who knew that they had elections for public service commissions? I wish we had that here in Florida. But 2 Democrats won, apparently the first time that's ever happened for a public service commission seat in Georgia. And that is pretty significant, I think. And it's, again, talking about the affordability issue in the case of energy prices, which are only raising. We have our friends who go out there. They had an event last Saturday about TECO. Last Saturday, we know Florida Power and Light asking for this record high amount. I don't know whether it's a good issue, because, again, when we talk about issues for Democrats versus Republicans in Florida, it seems like because the voter margins are so large for Republicans, it seems like it's very hard to break through. But the affordability issue, Ray Rowe, it just seems like a natural.
It's everywhere in the country. country.
Yeah. Well, but can we mention something about Donald Trump? Okay. So New York Post, which is Donald Trump's favorite newspaper, Trump, you might have saw, he was on 60 Minutes, of course, on Sunday. He's always talking every day, but basically he's downplaying this whole thing about affordability, right? Now that he's in charge, right? And of course, inflation was really the key issue, I think, along with immigration that got him elected last year. But he said on Fox News, actually, Brett Baer earlier this week, he said, quote, "We've got prices way down. I think they're coming down, but they are down already. I think the biggest problem is Republicans don't talk about it. They don't talk about the word affordability, and the Democrats lie about it." And then this is a New York Post editorial, and they say, let's see, Trump campaign on making life more affordable. Inflation may have been tamed to 2 to 3%, which is positive, yet prices aren't going down, as he says, and probably never will. And then they mention the tariff issue, which is something we never talked about in last year's campaign because that wasn't happening. Maybe Trump talked about it a little bit, but now that's in reality, these tariffs, man, are really significant. So
flip that paper over. Mitch is reading from a paper. On the other side, it says Trump 2.0 prices are insane in the New York Post.
Yes, in the New York Post. And so Target. So in this story, it says Target's prices are up 5.5% nationwide. Walmart's are up 5.3%. Amazon's price hikes have averaged more than 12%. And of course, beef we know it's 19% for steak, 14% for ground beef. And Trump is going on saying that affordability is not an issue. I mean, Barry Edwards, talk about being out of touch.
Well, I don't know if he's out of touch. He's spinning his spin. He doesn't want to say that he's failed. One thing we know about Donald Trump, he's never admitted in my lifetime that he's ever not succeeded at what he's going to do. So he's a salesman. He's a P.T. Barnum.
Right.
And so he's going to, but that was an issue not only in New York, but also around the country. And then one final thing before we go to Mandami and your New York stuff is that it was in the papers today, but it's still the first 3 or 4 hours that the Republicans have chosen their candidate. It will be no primary, will be Melanie Griffin, who's an attractive young 40-ish old woman, wife of Mike Griffin, but she's the current secretary of DPPR under
Ron DeSantis.
Ron DeSantis.
So, right, we're talking about the State Senate District 14 seat, which is a Hillsborough County seat, which has been vacated since Jay Collins was named to be the lieutenant governor a couple months ago. And Ron DeSantis dilly-dallied and didn't announce election date until after the legislative session will end in March.
So the election will be 2 weeks after the session adjourns.
Right.
And then they're certified about a month later, so the person will never serve in this legislative session. Now, after they're certified, they automatically become a member.
What is this? Now, this is interesting. And Melanie Griffin is also you mentioned, I'm sorry, Griffin, her
Mike Griffin is her husband.
He was a former USF president, right?
The only 2-time student body president of USF. He's the current vice chair of the University of South Florida Board of Trustees, and he's a former president of the Tampa Chamber of Commerce. He's one of the 4 or 5, I would say, most connected business people in Hillsborough County.
Yeah, that's interesting. Brian Nathan, I think, is the only Democrat.
So far, just one Democrat, Brian Nathan.
Maybe others will get in. We'll see about that.
There were some others, the trial lawyers and some friends looked at it, and some other folks. There's speculation because it's a special that you could win, but now there's no point in winning. But 2, the Republicans like specials because they get they spend about 50%.
You mean the Democrats do?
The Republicans like the specials because, like Tom Keene, you spend $1.7 million on whatever there, and they spend half of that. They lose it, but then they get it back 6 months later.
When it matters,
you guys in 2 sessions, right. And the Democrats blow their money. The Democratic caucus in the Senate. Now, I like Jenna Kingery and I like Tracy Davis. They're doing a great job, but they have finally corrected. It took them a year to correct because remember, they came in because Jason Pizzo on the floor of the Senate a year ago quit, or this
being
year.
a Democrat, back in
not only
April.
quit as a Democrat, resigned as leader, then quit, so the Democratic Party is dead. I mean, so he did everything bad. So Tracy and Jenna are doing a great job, but because of that, they've eliminated their debt, but they only have $300,000 or $400,000 in the bank. They can't play in this. The Republicans did this intentionally to get somebody like Brian Nathan in, and I'm going to give you some trade secrets here. If right now you have 11, if you have 10, you have 27 Republicans, you have 11 Democrats and 1 independent. Okay.
Right.
If this seat became a Democrat, you go back to 12. But of all the seats that are coming up, this seat is Jay Collins won it by 9.4%.
Against Ted Cruz in 2022.
Who spent $4.8 million, just to put it out there.
He didn't even win her own neighborhood.
Right. And Berman, his seat is very vulnerable. It's going to cost $5 million to defend the Berman seat.
Lori Berman, you're talking about the Senate Majority Leader, right. Or Senate Minority Leader in South Florida.
They want the Republicans, I think, they tell full of poop, but this is what they really want. They want the Republican to lose, the Democrat to win, because then you've got this guy saying, we got to defend my seat. And then if say they raise $5 million, okay, then you got $2.5 million going to Berman and $2.5 million here. The Republicans take them both, and they're up to 30. They want the Democrat to do well because they want the competition in the caucus to divide the caucus. And then they end up getting 30 because the Republicans are sitting on now. Albritton has moved about $15 million to his PACs, and he has nothing to run for. But the Republicans control about 28 to 30 million in the Senate caucus versus 300,000 or 400,000 for the Democratic caucus. So the Republicans don't have to raise another penny to finance this race 100%.
Okay, and I love that talk, but we want to talk about the elections, okay? I mean, because I can get into it.
Right.
Can I ask a quick pollster question of Barry? You were talking about how Trump won't admit to any kind of failures and things like that. Do you guys ever poll on what level of BS Republican voters will put up with until they kind of turn on a candidate?
Yes. Unfortunately, both parties are quite a bit, and that was validated because look at what happened in Virginia. The Attorney General. If you look at from the top of the ticket down to the next part of the ticket, the lieutenant governor, there's only a 2-point difference between the two. This is a guy that not only fantasized about killing his opponent, he fantasized about killing his opponent's kids.
The North Carolina J.
Oh no, the new Virginia.
I'm sorry, Virginia Attorney General. Yeah.
So we don't care on either side what the BS is, as long as you're part of our tribe. If you're part of our club, we're going to forgive. That guy in Virginia would never have he would have been off the ballot 5 years ago. But we're just
That's
all about our tribe.
And we'll look at Graham Plattner, the candidate out of Maine, running for Democratic Senate next year, who has created a lot of attraction and attention. But then we found out they had this Nazi tattoo on his chest for 18 years. But people are like, okay, you get it was a good explanation. We kind of dig your stance right now. So, yeah, we're over that.
He's a self-professed former fascist and former communist.
Yeah, he's an interesering dude.
He said, I had dark times in my life, but I'm good now.
Oh, by the way, one comment here. We got a caller about okay, so we got let's just recalibrate right now. It's 11:28 here. You're listening to Skinny here on WMNF 88.5 FM. I'm Mitch Perry along with Ray Rowe. We're with Barry Edwards, political consultant for both Dems and Republicans over the decades here in Florida. And we're talking about the elections from Tuesday. We're really kind of focusing on Florida because there's so much going on here, but we do want to talk about what happened nationally because that's a lot of interest. I know a lot of you were probably seeing that, following that. But speaking of, Barry, about your comments about University of South Florida, or actually, the Board of Governors yesterday, they did have a meeting, and this is a great story that has come out about they didn't raise a lot of fuss about the excessive spending and wasteful spending at New College of Florida.
They did?
They did not. They
Oh.
did not. By the way, but the reporting has come out about how outrageous the spending is here. Meanwhile, at the same time that Chief Financial Officer Blaise Ngoli is going to every city, including Orlando, I understand, 2 hours a day, going to everywhere saying, you guys are spending excessive money on all this waste because we need property tax reform next year. And New College, of course, is led by Richard Corcoran, the former Speaker of the House and former Education Commissioner under Ron DeSantis. They're doing all types of kind of if you're looking at fiscal sanity, kind of some really irresponsible things. Nothing mentioned yesterday. Okay, that's
I want to give you a clear way to look at it. UF gets subsidized about $10,000 per student by the state of Florida. The state of Florida subsidizes New College $137,500 per student. I was just down there last Wednesday with one of our state senators, and the campus is unbelievable. If I could go to college again, and it's like a 7-to-1 ratio for student faculty ratio.
Right.
The grounds are perfect. It's unbelievable. The money's pouring in. You should apply to go teach down there. I mean, it is a mecca.
Hey, we've got a call. Let's see. Hopefully these phones, I know they were been acting up. Let's see. But we've got Justin in calling about Jerry Demings. Justin, are you there?
Yeah, good morning. How are y'all doing?
Hey, good morning. What do you want to say about Mayor Demings?
Yeah, I was just shocked that he's actually running for governor. I mean, after everything we went through in Orange County, I mean, this mayor tried to force vaccinate his employees and firefighters. We had to go in there and speak at every meeting for months. Finally, the governor stepped in and stopped him from doing it. And even when his own firefighters came in to say that they were seeing vaccine injuries in the field, he actually called them liars. So he was just a despicable person to have as a mayor in Orange County, and I'm really just ashamed that he's going to be running, and I think he's going to lose personally.
Wow.
Now, you sound like a Republican.
No, not at all. I'm more of like a libertarian guy, nonpartisan. I was just really upset that he was trying to force vaccinate his firefighters in a time. Many of them are contemplating suicide. It was really disgusting.
Well, Justin, I appreciate the phone call, and I do know that was an issue. I don't know the details of it, but so we've got your perspective from it, Justin, and I definitely need to do my homework when we interview Mayor Demings next week. Okay, let's get to.
And I want to give you your stat on Mondami, which is what you want to get into, and I saved that. I saved all the good stuff from.
And before we do that, we had a call from Orlando. We're joined today by a reporter from Orlando, McKenna Schuler, an alum of WMNF Tampa, staff writer at Orlando Weekly. Literally, like 30 minutes ago, just turned in the first draft of a story she has about Florida politicians, including Anna Eskamani, Richie Floyd, who we've had on the show here, Eskamani as well.
Who's also a member of the Democratic Socialists of America,
That's
like
right.
Mondami.
That's right.
Great candidate for mayor in St. Pete, by the
way. Okay, so you heard that from the pollster here first. But McKenna Schuler, are you there with us today?
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you for joining us on The Skinny.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me.
Of course. So we're talking about Mondani here, Mitch. How did you see, that election?
Yeah, obviously the poll showed it for many months. I mean, he obviously got the most votes back in the primary back in June, and it was really his to lose. There was a lot of folks who wanted Curtis Sewell, the Republican, to drop out, so it would give Andrew Cuomo a better chance. Barry, I know you mentioned this in the other show. Andrew Cuomo, a very flawed candidate. He had those sexual harassment charges. He quit in disgrace in 2021.
And he also covered up the COVID stuff. His closures on COVID were probably more problematic to him. That's why the Republicans still voted for Sewell.
But New Yorker said that Cuomo had the likability of a traffic jam.
Well, but Mondami, now again, people are saying, I do think that this is a fascinating race because I think you're seeing things that we haven't seen since Barack Obama in terms of the excitement.
Okay, let's not get carried away.
No. I'm not saying this is going to be. I don't even know his mayoralty will be successful at all.
First of all, he can't run for president because he's not native.
No. All I'm saying is, Barry, my point is, to answer Ray's question, is how I saw his campaign because we saw this, and obviously it's New York City, the media capital of America,
of the world.
So we're going to get more stories about this race than any other local race.
Guess what? In the election day, nationwide, every Democrat, now you're going to find one, but I'm going to say 99.9%, every Democrat outperformed Kamala Harris. You look at it in Virginia, you look at New Jersey, all across the country, 5 points, 7 points, 14 points, 17 points. The one candidate who underperformed was your star, Mondami, who underperformed by 14 points in New York City, got 50%, whereas Kamala got 64%, I think, there. So he was down 14% against the two most flawed people he could be running against. And we could look down the ballot in New York where you had...
Well, but, let's put that in context, though.
We have comptroller and public advocate. They both got 72.9 and 75%. So that's where he should have been. And
no. Okay, that's good. Good numbers.
But he underperformed. You can display how you want. But he underperformed.
Yeah. Also,
points.
he was also a Muslim candidate in a city.
Oh, okay. Well, we're talking about excitement. Then maybe that's why.
Okay. Let's
actually, do you know the lieutenant governor of Virginia now is the first elected Muslim nationwide in a statewide race?
No, I didn't know
the
that.
lieutenant governor. So the Muslim factor is not a factor.
No, I'm saying in a city like New York City, though,
real data.
with a heavy Jewish population where he's accused of being a terrorist. That's the context, though. So it's like we've got to include that. Okay, Ray, so anyway, he got 50%, though, and I know his critics were going to jump all over him. He didn't make 50% in that race.
No, he did. He got 50.5.
That's what I'm saying. If he had not, it was very close. You would have heard a lot about, he didn't get 50%. So anyway, but the fascinating thing is I know McKenna is writing about this, because the natural thing is to say, well, Florida, we're immune to this because we're such a heavy Republican state. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, McKenna, you talked to Richie Floyd, and he said, people say it's New York, it could happen here, but Richie believes, and Zoran has echoed this. He just believes that in general, people see politics that actually cares about working people and doesn't bend the knee to the billionaire class. You were the first person to write about Richie Floyd, I think, locally in his campaign when he announced he was running for St. Petersburg City Council. How was Richie feeling the other day when you talked to him?
Yeah, no, I mean, he's very interesting in that he is very consistent in his cynicism about the Democratic Party in terms of, their takeaways from this election and what they will, apply to their own campaign strategy moving forward. But I was actually just reading through some of the coverage that I did back in 2021 when he won his seat to city council and just kind of reading through and what people had to say about him and his campaign and what he had to say back then just seems very familiar to what I've been reading the past few days about Mondani. And, I think it's interesting to see the criticism, especially from Florida Republicans, to Mamdani and everybody saying, like that could never happen down here. People are going to move out of New York City. But I mean, it literally did happen down here, not with a mayoral race, but you saw someone who had very strong community roots. Richie Floyd had this strong background in being a community advocate and showing up to picket lines, rallies. I talked to folks in the labor movement who were like, I'm not a democratic socialist. I wouldn't identify with that at all. But, he showed up for us. And so we're going to listen to him and believe him when he says that he's going to fight for us and fight for these, especially affordability issues, which are still just as relevant back then as they are today, just maybe in a different, context.
And I know we're going back like 100 years, but Florida, no stranger to socialist candidates. I think Eugene Debs got more of the vote than William Taft or Theodore Roosevelt. The city of Gulfport had a socialist mayor, 1910. It is a long time ago, right?
I'm glad you mentioned Eugene
Yeah, it's been a hot minute.
because Mondami quoted him 5 times on his acceptance speech.
He did. So it was Eugene Debs, 1912. Got
really?
more of the vote, yes. So, it's not like it's a new thing. But Barry, what do the polls say? I mean, could a candidate like that rise in any office here?
In Orlando.
Right. And Escamani is running for mayor.
And she's not
she's not a socialist, right?
But she's not anywhere near as liberal as those two are.
You talked about
I talked to her for this story that I'm writing for Creative Loafing. And I did ask her point blank, just, for clarification purposes, like, how do you identify? And she did say that she would affiliate with the Working Families Party if they had a sort of like chapter down here. But she does not identify as a Democratic socialist.
But also her temperament is much. I mean, I have friends. I'm not going to say their names. That a Democratic senator. Well, that are a little harsher on the floor. She is never nasty.
Right.
She's not mean.
She's got a great manner. Trying to work with Republicans. Yeah.
She can make her point without being mean spirited. But I think Orlando could do that. I think that probably.
Well, St. Petersburg has done it, as we've seen, with the DSA candidate.
Yeah, but I think you look at that candidate, it was Jeff Danner versus him.
Right.
Danner's campaign team focused all of their money on people that are registered in the last year and were under 30. And I have a memo that I wrote saying that this was idiotic, and it was idiotic. It was like 3% of the vote that they focused on all their. So, but he did do a good job, and he had a lot more resources than Danner.
Kudos to him for that, though, because he was an unknown. He had never ran for office before.
I think for city council candidates, I think they're distracting because they're so low profile that people really aren't paying attention.
By the way, it's interesting because we should have had, but it was a charter amendment. We could have had an election in St. Petersburg on Tuesday, right? That's the way the schedule usually works with municipal elections in St. Petersburg.
And they moved it to.
The voters decided to move it to next year. Give Ken Welch and Richie Floyd, all these other city council members, an extra year in office.
Which will be the first time that it's done that, so that'll double the turnout.
Right.
So you can go from a
now, do you support
turnout.
that, by the way? Because some people, like in Tampa, they like it given the off year, even though nobody votes. But
I don't support that, and because if you look at around the state when that's happened. Number one, it doubles your cost of running the election. Okay, so now more people are going to make uninformed decisions.
Wait a minute. No, if you combine a regular municipal election with a
I think what Barry's arguing is that since there's so much stuff on the ballot, you have to spend more money to get anything done.
I went up to Gainesville to watch when they just did it, and so you go to these forums, and the first day you'd have the governor's candidates and the congressional candidates and the Senate candidates and the county commission candidates. And you'd have 200 people in the audience. And the next day you'd have the city council candidates, and nobody was there. It'd be like 4 people. So the amount of attention that went to the city council candidates declined 80-90% because there's too many things on the ballot.
Right.
But number 2 is if I have to campaign in St. Petersburg in a off year and I'm campaigning for 30%, I have to mail to 30% of the people. I have to call 30%. I have to knock 30% of the doors. Now in next year's governor's race is going to be 62% in St. Petersburg. I've doubled the amount of mail that I have to do, double the amount of doors, double the amount of calls. So it's doubled my cost. So it has the inverse effect or the opposite effect of what a lot of people want. But it also means there's more uninformed voters that are just going to vote. And now, by the way, I don't know if people knew this or not, 3 or 4 years ago, the federal judge ruled that it was unconstitutional in the Florida statutes that prohibited you from talking about partisanship in nonpartisan elections. And Barry Edwards was one of the first person that exploited that because the state of Florida decided not to appeal that. So now, when we go forward, every election in Florida for the school board is going to say Barry Edwards, Republican, or
even though it's officially nonpartisan race.
You cannot sanction them. The state is
okay.
barred
Interesting.
and you can do that in city council races.
Yeah.
So you're going to have a total change.
And we've seen that since the Trump, last 10 years, where people who are very new to politics, voting in politics because of Trump, whether they like him or hate him, and they want to know from a city council member or a school board member, even though it's a nonpartisan race, are you left, are you Democrat or Republican? I mean, I see that all the time.
Now they can say. The only ones that are protected for that is the judges.
I just wanted to remind our listeners, if you're just tuning in right now, it's 41 minutes after the hour. You're listening to The Skinny here on WMNF 88.5 FM. I'm Mitch Perry with Ray Roa. We've got on the line here McKenna Schuler, reporter with the Orlando
Weekly,
of course,
reporter over there.
And Barry Edwards, longtime political consultant. McKenna, I want to ask you about Jerry Demings, because you've been there for several years now, covering Orange County and Orlando. What's your quick synopsis of now that he's entered the race here? What would you tell our listeners about Jerry Demings?
Well, he is a former police chief, former sheriff, and I can definitely see how he's viewed as maybe a controversial character. I didn't actually have that lore as far as the anti-vax stuff because I haven't been here that long.
Right.
But we have seen him, pursue some, maybe it's generous to say, progressive policies in the county commission. But he's also very pro law and order, which you would think would appeal to Republicans and maybe independents as well. But with that kind of complicated lore, I don't know how that might affect, I'm actually interested to see who, in a governor's race, I'm still kind of like processing even his run, because it's not surprising to me at all. But I'm just curious to see how his platform rolls out. I know that affordability was an issue that he brought up the other day, and that's obviously been one that's been very prominent in Orange County. And there has been a lot of funding dedicated over the years to affordable housing and homelessness services. I believe Demings actually did oversee the development of an affordable housing trust fund, specifically to dedicate funding towards the development of affordable housing here a few years ago. So he has a track record in terms of like putting his money where his mouth is on that to an extent. It's just, an issue that has grown even harder and harder to address, I think, as a mayor and as, a county.
Let's go to our phones. We've got Art calling in from Lakeland. I was asking for Lakeland listeners here. Hey, Art, you're on the air.
Hey, thank you. I'm backtracking a little, but, I try to watch as much news as I can from all the different channels. And I put myself through torture and watch Fox for about 5 minutes yesterday. And it amazed me that in the 5 minutes I watched, they mentioned the word communism 10 times and never once said anything about socialism. Are they just that stupid that they don't know the difference? Or are they just really afraid of socialism? And so they're trying to scare everybody,
right,
communism.
Oh, by the way, I also watched a few minutes of Laura Ingraham last night, and she made it sound like it was a bad thing. That it was actually bad for Democrats that they were so successful on Tuesday night. I'm still trying to figure out that one.
Okay, so everything was a push.
Make any sense ever.
Hey, Art, did you vote, by the way, on that charter amendment we were mentioning earlier about term limits?
I did, and I voted against it.
Okay.
Because I want term limits.
Right. I mean, were you surprised that it was successful?
Yeah, I know. Well, I can only vote once.
That's right. Hey, appreciate the phone call, Art, very much. What were you say, Barry?
Thanks, Art.
So I think that, first of all, the language was probably, people voted for it because they probably thought they were limiting it to 20. Where it was, but as far as the vaccines, being anti-vax or being pro-vaccine and pro-vaccine mandates is not going to hurt Jerry Demings in a Democratic primary in Florida.
Right.
That is where they are.
Right. It would hurt him in the general, yeah.
It hurt him in the general. But he's not going to win the general because Republicans, and I'm going to predict on this show, because we did this on Florida This Week, and I was with Alex Sink 3 cycles in a row. And in fact, you poo-pooed me when I said that Trump and Scott were going to win by 15, and I was wrong. They only won by 13, and I said that 15 months out.
I was correct in my poo-pooing then.
But I'm going to tell you that today, Ashley Moody will win by 30, and all the other cabinet.
Wait a second, 30 points.
I think in Florida that you're going to have that the bottom line, the worst performing Democrat or Republican, other than if Uthermeyer's on there still, will be 20 points. So 20 to 30 points is the margins that the Republican statewide will win. Uthermeyer, depending on how Hope Florida.
The Attorney General, you're talking about James Uthermeyer,
right?
Who may, by the way, there's a Hope Florida investigation still going on, and we'll see how that plays out. Because if there's any, I think he'd be the highest figure implicated if there is some charges that come up against that case.
He will definitely be the guy. That
Hey, can I mention, by the way, Nancy Pelosi? I want to bring her up because she announced, of course, yesterday, and I wanted this to happen. Like I'm from San Francisco, as most listeners know. She was my congresswoman for 13 years. 87, she came in. It'll be 40 years when she steps down a year from now. I think it definitely was time for her to do it at the age of 85. But my God, I think that there's a U.S. political Hall of Fame. She should be in there. Twice elected as Speaker of the House, or served as Speaker of the House. In San Francisco, many times people thought she was San Francisco, that she was not liberal enough, right? And so famously, I think it was 2005, Cindy Sheehan ran against her when the height of the Iraq War. I was looking at these photos in San Francisco Chronicle yesterday. Anyway, it's so much that she's been involved with. You go back a year ago, Joe Biden, apparently she was the one who really basically pushed Joe Biden out and gave him the phone call, like, Joe, it's time to go. Anyway, very controversial. Of course, the right has loved to pillory her for decades. I think she's an American icon. I just want to put it out there and say that.
As somebody who, as a political scientist, and I tell you she was the most powerful speaker of all time.
Really? Wow.
But it came as a cost. Most speakers would give you the pass if you had the votes. Yeah. She didn't give people passes when she wanted like an affordable care. So she ended up being part of the demise.
Yeah, she's hardball, definitely.
So she was powerful as far as a speaker, as effective at getting what she wanted done. But it's cost you, the Democrats, has cost you thousands of seats nationwide because of her successes.
Well, you're right. It used to be Ted Kennedy. It used to be Hillary Clinton. They always got to find a bogey man or woman. Now it's going to be AOC and Mandami. By the way, so AOC, like, again, Fox is making AOC like now the face of the Democratic Party more than Mandami. I almost feel like right now.
The Republican campaign committee's already made ads. Against Mandami and are airing them against their candidates.
Oh, we have a note from Ed here, by the way, who says this is a very cynical conversation. Democratic socialist does not equate to socialist. Yes, we can have someone elected in Florida based on helping families and tackling affordability. This is not a liberal idea.
Yeah, McKenna, let me ask you about that. There's a little bit of that in your story, the semantics about it and what it means. And I think what Richie said and what I've heard Mamdani say is that really it's about, are these things more than slogans, right? Housing for all. Is that something I'm just going to say on the trail, or is it something I'm going to, actually fight for and act on? In your reporting and in your experience covering candidates from this side of the political spectrum, what does that mean to be a democratic socialist?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I've followed different races by DSA members across the country. And just to see, like, I felt like Mamdani had this very delicate and, effective balance in terms of the fact that he did openly campaign as a democratic socialist. He did affiliate himself with that label, but that wasn't like something he rested his laurels on. Like he used that as an opportunity, I think, identifying with that label to kind of explain what that really meant in terms of what he believes in and the way that he fights for these things and that he plans to fight for these things. And I think it offered like an educational experience in terms of being able to demystify and destigmatize rather than, maybe when you do turn on Fox News or even, when you hear from Democrats, sometimes I just use the term socialist or communist as if it's, it should be automatically synonymous with Satan.
Yeah, epithet, definitely.
So it's like, I think that he had a really good balance in terms of like, he ran as a democratic socialist, but that wasn't his campaign. He ran as somebody who was fighting for, a very affordability-driven campaign in terms of like advocating for issues and policies that he believed would help a lot of working people across the board, whether that was universal childcare or making buses free in a very public transportation-heavy or reliant city. And then when I talked to some local Democrats about Mamdani's election victory, none of the other people besides Richie Floyd that I talked to would identify with socialism themselves, but they, acknowledged the popularity and the resonance of talking about affordability issues and definitely and said that they that's something that they are considering moving forward in terms of how they plan to campaign as well as being able to.
Yeah, and McKenna, on that point, for what it's worth, David Jolly, who we talked about earlier, that is really one of the key platforms of his is affordability. I've seen him several times. We've had him on the air, the radio. It's a great issue because it's a very real issue, and it's go back to it's the economy stupid 1992. James Carville. That never goes away. Hey, we've got Chris from Clearwater who wants to weigh in on Mamdani's election victory Tuesday night. Chris, you're on the air.
Yeah, I do want to comment on that, Mitch. I want to also say that stereotyping is not a progressive ideal, which you failed when you tried to stereotype the first caller, Justin, by inferring he sounds like a Republican.
That was Barry.
That was
not
Barry,
us.
not me. That was
We're
not me.
Gonna take responsibility for that one.
Well, but when you have 80% of Democrats are for vaccine mandates and 80% of Republicans are against them, you can make reasonable assumptions.
But go on, Chris.
Yeah.
All right. Well, when you and the lady guest use the throwaway term anti-vax to apply those.
Are you talking about Chris? I don't want to talk about vaccination too much. You want to talk about Mamdani? Come on.
Yeah. I'm just saying that opposing mass mandating and medical treatment does not make one anti-vax. And
okay. Fair enough.
And, it certainly has a lot. Mamdani's win has a lot to do with Cuomo's infamous history that caused the nursing homes to be super spreader sites, which killed the elderly, and who are the most vulnerable to infections like COVID, while the Vice Admiral Mike Dumont begged Cuomo to send patients to the Navy's the Navy ship USNS Comfort during the height of the crisis, which had 1,000-bed capacity with only 30.
So, are you attributing that his more Cuomo's vulnerability than Mamdani's tactics that he did to win? I mean, what are you getting at here?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He lost his campaign because a lot of seniors lost their lives and spread COVID.
I agree. I mean, I think that definitely had a substantial amount to do with it.
All right, thanks for that.
I'm gonna have to speak up, and people know I'm center right, but not a right. Mamdani had the best software I've ever seen for a campaign. Is if you clicked on Facebook and you looked at his.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks for the call, Chris.
If you looked at his anything on his social media, you got a text or a response that looked like, "Hi, this is Zoran. I'm glad you looked at me on Facebook. What's your issue?" Then you type in what your big issue is, and then it would respond. It was the cutting edge technology that I've ever seen in a campaign in America. He is 10 years. His campaign was 10 years technologically beyond anybody else.
Loved that
you got to give him credit for that.
Yeah. No, what I did was also he went up to Trump early on in his campain, did these short videos talking to Trump voters. People, we said, you voted for Donald Trump. Why did you vote for him?
That's right.
Again, I want to see more Democrats do that. Instead of just calling them deplorables, to understand what does it take to get your vote, basically.
Yeah, Barry, I have a question. So let's hypothetical. A DSA candidate approaches you with some money, wants to run some polls, wants to see if they can win elections. What would you tell them to ask people or test, and what kind of polls would you run on behalf of a DSA client?
So I would find out. I'd ask what people in that area, and it varies by your district. Like we've talked about, the most important thing to winning an election is your district. That's 70% of it. 20% is a national mood. The candidate is 10%. So the candidate is really de minimis compared to everything else.
Really?
You can't overcome the district. Why do you think that why do you think that the race issue is so important? On a black district, there's no black majority access district in the country that's not occupied by the race it's supposed to be occupied. There's a reason why Barack Obama and Eric Holder raised $2 billion for the redistricting project. There's a reason why we just did that in California, because a district is the predominant indicator of how you're going to win. I like the kid that called in from North Florida. That district's a 62-38 Republican district.
Right. It's going to be tough.
So that district, if he does extraordinarily well, performs better than any other person in the history of that district, he's still going to lose by 15 points.
Well, it's kind of like what happened the special elections for Congress earlier this year, right? With the Randy Fine and Jimmy Petronis, the Democrats who ran in that, those were 30-point districts, the Matt Gaetz district and who was the other one? Mike Waltz district.
Although we ought to caveat that, and my friends worked on the losing campaigns, and my other friends worked on the winning campaigns. When you had Waltz won the first time, he only won by 14, and when Ron DeSantis won the district, he won by 14. So the margins were bigger after they got in.
Right.
But Randy Fine, after he won the primary, campaigned one day in the district.
Yeah,
Joe
he took it for granted.
You got to get your ass down there. And he said, "Oh, why?" But they also spent $2.5 million versus 50. The two districts the Republicans spent $4 million,
and the Dems spent a lot more,
$25.5 million. So the Republicans are saying, "Why pay What difference would it have made if they had won 25? The Democrats would have still come, oh, we did better. Who cares?
Right.
The Democrat
you lost by
money is
15
gone.
instead of 30.
The Democrat money is gone forever. The Republicans have the money in the bank, and they're ready to go.
Isn't that is kind of, frankly, kind of the situation in Florida, right, where a Democrat can lose by 14 points, and they go, hey, you know, we overperformed. Like, we're on the... But what has to show... Going back to Mamdani and Tuesday night's election results... Oh, by the way, I have some quotes from the Republicans.
But Mamdani had the best... his campaign was extraordinarily disciplined, and he bent the knee at the end when he had to soften to get some Jewish voters and stuff like that.
Hey, a couple quotes from some Republicans, by the way, about Tuesday's night election. Vivek Ramaswamy said, quote, "We got our asses handed to us." Ted Cruz, quote, "A disaster." Kentucky Representative Thomas Massey, "A shellacking." Steve Bannon, "A blowout." So
they've all stopped short of criticizing Donald Trump.
But those guys are all Trumpian. I mean,
okay. We got they are. Let's got Jim from St. Petersburg wants to talk about David Jolly. Hi, Jim.
Hey, I am a dyed-in-the-wool liberal. I've watched David Jolly. I've listened to David Jolly. And, you know, there are two things in politics that I think are the most important. One is intelligence, and the other is honesty. And this guy is, you know, probably the smartest would-be politician that I've ever listened to. He's also extremely ethical. And I'm not so sure about all these other people, the policeman from Orlando and all this. But I do know I've listened to him extensively on the TV, and he's a very, very impressive person. I think that he would be better if he could be a senator from Florida. I think because he has so much experience in Washington.
Yeah.
But he's smart enough and ethical enough, which we have a real shortage of that. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Jim.
He did have great answers for us, Mitch, when he was on the show with us. We asked him about Zoran's campaign, and he just basically said, I reject the left and right spectrum altogether, and just took it right back to affordability. He has a way with words, David Jolly.
He's very loquacious.
Yeah, no, David's great. And by the way, Marjorie Taylor Greene, want to bring this up too, because that's what I wanted to say. You know, we had the No Kings protest just a few weeks ago, right? The second big one of the year.
She had one of those?
No, well, she wasn't, but she sounded like she might be one of them.
She's going to be a switcher.
Well, but this is the thing, though. Interesting. I do think that this election, again, a long year away, and this is the redistricting really is disturbing because Texas did it first, now California, but Florida, we'll see if they're going to do it here. But because I think
have to do it here.
I think it's so obvious that Donald Trump sees he's going to lose Congress next year, so he's just telling these states, let's just fix the districts up this way, that way. But anyway, Marjorie Taylor Greene, quote to CNN last night or 2 days ago, she says, "You're not going to convince them to go to the polls and vote by bailing out Argentina." She's talking about voters and Republican voters. "You're not going to convince them to go to the polls and vote by continuing to fund foreign wars and foreign countries and foreign causes. You're going to get them to go to the polls and vote when you show up to work and actually fix the problems that they face every single day." And this is an indictment, I think, of Donald Trump and the Republicans, and partly why, as Thomas Massey said, they got a shellacking on Tuesday night.
Well, I don't know if they got a shellacking. They lost. These are off terms.
Off your elections.
Off.
But you're right.
I think she's got a point. And you know what's really going to push it is these airport shutdown. You shut down the airports, you're going to have...
If somebody's missing their flight for Thanksgiving, they're going to be angry.
That's going to end it.
Skip Sassy, our board operator, says he's a victim.
Cindy Sheehan and I sat together at the State of the Union under George W. Bush.
Yeah.
And she got escorted out the same night that Bill Young's wife got thrown out because she wore this shirt that said 1,000 dead, and then Beverly had hers. And I had gone to the Young's office before that, and it said support the troops. But anyway, one final thing. Dick Cheney, we should remember him.
We should mention him, yeah.
The right is attacking him.
Well,
I met him several times at Mel and Betty Sembler's home. You can say all mistakes he made. He was a patriot, and he loved America. And he told me, he said, "Did we make mistakes? You damn right we did. But I was never going to allow America to be attacked again." And he said, "We may have overreacted." And it says it's easy to do in hindsight what you didn't know at the time.
By the way, he voted for Kamala Harris last year. Anyway.
Barry Edwards, the raging centrist, the most famous pollster in West Central Florida. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today. McKenna Schuler, staff writer at Orlando Weekly. Thank you for joining us today. Look for her story about Florida politicians reacting to the election of Mamdani in Creative Loafing here in the next few days online and in print next week. Mitch Perry, our fearless leader, thank you so much for putting this show together. Looking forward to having Demings on the
Yes,
show
hopefully.
next
Yes.
week. Skip Sassy on the boards for us this afternoon. Anthony Maduro on the phones. Thank you to all the callers. It's been a lot of fun to talk about an election today, not talk about some crazy news that broke out of Washington and crazy stuff. So thanks for giving us the space. Thanks for supporting WMNF Tampa. Joellen Schilke is in Studio One. She's still got the lights on in there. I feel like the lights have to get set there pretty soon. We're going to talk about Art in Your Ear and transition you into a Friday afternoon in beautiful Tampa, Florida. Thank you so much for supporting WMNF. We'll see you next week.